Good evening, everyone from Toronto, Canada, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone who has joined us from across the world on Zoom and Facebook Live. We are delighted to have you at our side event, Rebuilding Better: How Can Sustainable Transport Facilitate the Creation of Local Circular Economies at the second United Nations Global Sustainable Transport Conference. My name is Kehkasha. I'm the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Now, we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has created a crisis of uneven impacts. Multiple UN and other reports over the past many months have tracked the deepening impact of the virus on all areas of the world economy and have mapped out how the crisis has affected global trade, investment, production, employment, and ultimately individual livelihoods. There is unequivocal agreement that the pandemic's impact has been asymmetric and tilted towards the most vulnerable, both within and across countries, affecting disproportionately low-income households, migrants, informal workers, and women, as the reports say. Global poverty is on the rise for the first time since the 1998 Asian financial crisis. In 1990, the global poverty rate was up by 35.9%, and by 2018, it had been curtailed to 8.6%, but has already inched up to 8.8% this year and will likely rise throughout 2021. And on top of that, COVID-19 has had an excessive effect on three sectors, in particular, tourism, transport, and micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which employ many vulnerable groups. For example, while older men may have suffered more from the health emergency part of COVID, women and young people are most affected by the economic crisis. And according to a UN Women report, across the 32 countries for which gender disaggregated data is available, the countries with higher COVID-19 incidence have seen greater increases in female unemployment than men. These and other setbacks, such as school closures that threaten 20 years of progress in expanding access to education, especially for girls, as well as the regression in the transition to more eco-friendly systems, and that includes sustainable transport systems, will have strong negative impacts on the productive capacity of countries well into the future. So while the crisis has had uneven impacts, the responses to have been uneven. We've seen how the disparities caused by the COVID-19 crisis are glaring, and vaccine production and delivery are certain to underscore the limited capacity of most developing and least developed countries to respond to the crisis. And a recent UN trade report highlights that the median additional spending per capita on fiscal stimulus or foregone revenues in developed countries and economies in transition has been $1,365 since the outbreak, compared to just $18 in least developed countries and $76 in other developing nations. And the situation is exacerbated by the immense fluidity in supply chains, causing shortages, raising prices, and putting greater burden on the poor and vulnerable. What then is the way forward? How can we rebuild better into a better and newer normal? How can we make our supply chains more resilient? How to resolve this inequity? Moving to local circular economies through a just transition to sustainable transport systems might just be the answer, but we do need to find out the hows and the whens. To shed more light on this conundrum that has such a definitive influence on our future, we have with us an eminent panel of experts to share their insights on this theme. I'd now like to invite our first speaker, Jinlai Feng, Program Officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency, or ARENA. Jinlai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Jinlei Feng. I'm Program Officer at International Renewable Energy Agency. Many thanks to the Green Hope Foundation for inviting me to join the discussion today, which is very important for achieving the sustainable decarbonization of the transport sector. So today I would like to very briefly share some views on how renewable energy-based transport can accelerate the development of a circular economy. So the decarbonization of the transport sector will create a significant demand for the renewable energy transport fuels that produced from waste. The waste to energy industry is an essential part of the circular economy now and in the future. So the waste to energy technology for the transport sector include the first liquid biofuels that made from organic residues such as crop residues, forest residues, or household waste such as the used cooking oil. And it also included biomethane that's purified from biogas. The biomethane can come from the captured landfill gas from the municipal solid waste landfill plants, or even dedicated biogas plants processing the organic waste. The 1.5-degree scenario in IRENA's World Energy Transitions Outlook outline a pathway to limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degree and bringing the global CO2 emission closer to net zero by 2050. This scenario target would not be achievable without a major contribution from the biofuels, including the waste-based biofuels for the transport. So to achieve these targets, bioenergy such as liquid biofuels, as well as biomethane, biogas, and solid biomass would have to contribute a quarter of the total energy demand by 2050. And 15% of all the bioenergy production will be used only for transport. The biofuels will provide a major share of the total transport final energy demand in the future. They are expected to play a particularly important role. So for example, the decarbonization of long-haul transport, including aviation, shipping, and long-haul freight transport, complementing the deployment with electric vehicles, they all need the support from the liquid biofuels. Currently, the liquid biofuels are limited to very, very small scale compared to the fossil fuels. It only provides some 3% of the total transport energy demand. And the pandemic has strongly hit the biofuel for transport. In 2020, the global renewable biofuel consumption declined by 5% compared to the previous year. And the biomethane as the vehicle fuel is even smaller. The use of biomethane for transport only exists in the US and in the European Union. The US is the largest producer of biomethane for vehicle, and the European Union is another major producer, such as Sweden, UK, Germany, and Italy. However, most of the liquid biofuels now for transport currently are produced from the energy groups such as sugar cane for the bioethanol in Latin America, or the crop-based bioethanol in North America, or palm oil-based biodiesel in Southeast Asia. These need to change in the near future. because of the sustainability concerns related to the conventional liquid biofuels feedstock. So the liquid biofuels production has potential sustainability risks. They could include the risks linked to the land use, the air pollution, reduced water and soil quality, biodiversity loss or competition with the food supply, and the effects on the vulnerable groups. So the only way is liquid biofuels and the biomethane that produced from waste. This part need to be increased significantly to avoid the sustainability risks. So technologies are widely available and the potential are very huge. For example, the urban municipal waste is a very large and growing problem. The municipal solid waste rose from 1.3 billion tons yearly in 10 years ago is 2011, and just 4 years increased to 2 billion yearly in 2016, and it would increase to 3.4 billion tons yearly by 2050. So now at least almost 1,000 globally waste to energy plants worldwide use either municipal solid waste or industry waste as a feedstock to produce renewable biomethane. This landfill methane provides huge opportunity to replace diesel or gasoline to power the public transport, vehicle fleets, or private cars. And liquid biofuels can also be produced from waste, such as forest residues, crop residues, and used cooking oil. For example, China is the major producer of the biodiesel based on used cooking oil. In the pandemic context, for example, last year, all the biodiesel exportation to European Union declined, all of them, except the used cooking oil-based biodiesel. Only this waste-based biofuel continued to grow in 2020. But however, the scale is very, very limited. In 2018, about only 11 billion liters of the used cooking oil generated from the food industry. But only about 10% of the used cooking oil were used for biodiesel production. It's a very small share. A large part of the potential is untapped because various barriers. So these barriers are impeding the deployment of biofuels for transport. So these barriers could include policy uncertainty, such as a lack of clear or long-term policy signal given to the waste to energy for transport in their national energy policy making, or could be institutional or organizational issue because lack of coordination between the different government departments. Let's say waste is one department, but transport field is usually another ministry. So other barriers include the high cost of renewable fuels, the difficulties in securing finance, the low level of reliability and efficiency, or lack of skilled worker or infrastructures. And policy measures are needed to address those barriers. They should be tailored for the local context and aligned with other sector policies and strategies. So generally, these policy measures can include a clear and long-term strategy on the waste to energy linking to the transport sector strategy. And financial fiscal measures also are needed to fix the energy market distortion by the fossil fuel subsidies and improve the cost competitiveness and the finance accessibility. So other policies can also include the regulation, obligation, or mandates depending on specific context. So policy support also for research, development, and demonstration also are needed. So except these policies, the last point are some key infrastructures. These are necessary for deployment of waste to energy for transport fuels. These include the biofuel feedstock segments. For example, the waste collection and processing segment to ensure enough and qualified feedstock. It also includes the liquid biofuels and the biomethane distribution and refueling stations to make the waste-based renewable transport fuel are more accessible and available. So basically, these are very brief rules based on IRENA's existing and the forthcoming report on bioenergy, on renewables for transport. If you need more details, we can continue the discussion later and after the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jinmai, for bringing in that perspective of clean energy and how that helps the transition to sustainable transport and circular economies. As we all know, it's like the fossil fuel industry has a very big role to play in unsustainable transport practices and, of course, a linear economy. But clean energy is really important. And as you stated, for the decarbonization of transport, energy infrastructure is very important. And the energy from waste is an essential part of that circular economy. And it really liked your example of how, for example, municipal solid waste can be upcycled to create sustainable energy that in turn can fuel sustainable transport. So yeah, it's really great to hear about IRENA's work on this and the report on bioenergy and how that fuels sustainable transport and the creation of a local circular bioeconomy. So thank you once again. With that, I would like to invite our next speaker, Srijit Balasubramanian, Senior Lecturer and Chair of the Research Committee, Middlesex University, Dubai. Srijit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kekash and Basu, and also thank you, Green Hope Foundation, for inviting me for this prestigious panel and in an important conference. So greetings from Dubai and very good morning to all my fellow panelists and audience. It's a pleasure again to be here and discuss some of the sustainable transportation initiatives that is happening, mostly in the UAE perspective. I've been living in the UAE for the last 13 years, so I can see how UAE has transformed over the years in terms of promoting sustainable transportation and its initiatives towards circular economy. So I'm going to more discuss the multiple initiatives taken by UAE and also the research that I've been involved. So I would be touching on some of the policy aspects and also some of the different sectors which are critical for UAE and in the region. Basically mostly coming from my own research. And also I head the Center for Supply Chain Excellence at the university. So supply chain has a huge role in creating a circular economy. So some of the activities from our center, some of the projects that we are involved in. So I'm going to share some of the insights. I would like to start by saying UAE has a circular economy policy or a vision, which is the 2021 to 2031 vision, which is a 10-year vision, which is starting in 2021 in the midst of pandemic. So this shows how UAE is having that vision of creating that circular economy. And one of the 4 pillars of circular economy is sustainable transport. So it kind of links very well with the theme of today's discussion. So sustainable transport is critical to the circular economy. And I'll come to that on some of those initiatives. And also critical to sustainable transport is the sustainable infrastructure. So you can have a good sustainable transport network provided you have a sustainable and green infrastructure. So 2 things is critical for any country to implement that has to go together. Some of the initiatives of UAE include, like our fellow panel member mentioned about of renewable energy. So So UAE public sector has worked, especially Dubai government with Roads and Transport Authority in Dubai have increased the accessibility of public transport to everyone. So we use here not only metro buses and also water taxis and water buses. So and it's all connected via an app. So it's encouraging public to use public transport, and that's a huge change that I've seen over the years. Is the number of people have been shifting from using their own personal cars to using public transport, which kind of, we don't see that that's an individual contribution. So it's a collective effort. It's a kind of shared value concept, but it kind of reduces the carbon offset and it's created a lot of positive for the environment. And also along in the same line of environmental issues, UAE public transport, public sector is also accessible even for people with determination, people with disabilities. We call it here people of determination. So it's accessible for people, for all of them, and that's the aim of UAE, to make sure more and more people move towards public transport. And also some of the initiatives includes ride sharing, so encouraging people to share taxis, and also the taxi fleet in UAE is either now hybrid or moving towards electric cars. So UAE is kind of, the government is leading from the front and encouraging the private sector to follow. Unlike some other countries where private sector leads and the public sector follows, here the government is kind of showing that we show you how to do it and then you can follow. So this has also encouraged a lot of private sectors to kind of change their vehicle fleet and to make it more energy efficient. So one of the main aspects of sustainable transport is to have energy efficient, reduce carbon emission and have energy efficient vehicles. And also, reduce congestion and traffic, which is also linked more to social sustainability and also to environmental sustainability. Now coming to the private sector, so one of the recent changes we have seen now is the concept of backhauling, which means UAE in most of the transport is truck-based transportation system, and usually include GCC wide. A lot of trucks, those who have lived in UAE would know, like trucks going in and out from UAE to Oman to Saudi Arabia, long trucks, but in most cases they come empty. So there is an backhauling is a concept where you can actually kind of use that empty trucks for moving goods. So if a truck from Dubai goes to say Oman and delivers, usually it comes return empty. You're talking about hundreds of kilometers, sometimes thousands of kilometers of a empty truck, which is not sustainable. So sometimes it requires some policy changes or concepts, not necessarily investing in a lot of technology. So my approach to sustainable is, first off, you look at the low hanging fruit, something we can fix faster, maybe through small changes in policies, and then you can definitely work on technology and all other aspects. So backhauling is one key aspect. The other aspect, definitely, which is close to everyone's heart, is the food wastage. Not proud to say that UAE is had issues of lot of food wastages, but again, this is now being kind of addressed now. It's taken up very seriously, and from supply chain point of view, one of the changes I have seen recently to reduce the food wastage is again the green infrastructure and the green transportation. So most of the companies, especially in the food sector, have been told to have stringent requirements for refrigerated trucks. The warehouses are refrigerated. So on the outside, it might look these refrigerated trucks are creating more carbon emission, but in fact, they are actually helping the environment because of the reduction in food wastage. So a huge amount of food wastage can be prevented just by having the right temperature, having the right storage, having the right awareness for people like drivers on how to handle the trucks, handling in warehouses. So these things could really help the wastage, and definitely on the transportation, you can use some renewable fuel or solar panels attached to the trucks to kind of to offset some of the cooling requirements as well. So cold chain, it's again a very critical part, especially given that temperatures can shoot up to 40, 50 degrees Celsius in summer. Having a good infrastructure, a refrigerated infrastructure is very important. So again, a lot of work is going on cold chain network, which definitely helped during the COVID vaccination. Since you mentioned about the COVID and the vaccine, UAE is leading the race in COVID vaccination with 97% as per yesterday's statistics. I'll say 97% of the population is vaccinated, which is incredible, and which is also a testament to the cold chain infrastructure because of trucks with refrigeration, because some of the vaccines require a lot of temperature, like minus 20 degrees Celsius requirement. And this infrastructure can be used for sustainable food storage and food production moving on. So definitely this is something. And coming to technology, again, UAE is leading on the technology with autonomous vehicles. So we just piloted a public transport, a short transport with autonomous buses, and also on electric vehicles. Also, it's encouraging public to use or purchase electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles by giving incentives. And that's again showing that many people are moving towards electric vehicles. And it's a collective effort. It's a shared value concept again, given that the malls are giving free charging stations. Most buildings, my building here also gives a free charging in the parking if you have an electric vehicle, which I don't have yet, but it's something can consider, because so it's everyone is taking a collective effort, and that's great to see. And that's all about the Green Hope Foundation. It's about, it's not one person, it's the collective society coming together for an initiative. So definitely that is seen in the shift. And for outsiders, it might think like, why UAE has to go to electric, because its fuel is cheap and we are just sitting on petroleum. But we kind of know that in moving forward, and we are taking the initiative, and number of electric cars on road it's really high compared to some of the other countries. And finally, I'll come to the last, education sector, which is also very central to my area as an academic, as a teacher. I teach over 500 students in a year. So any changes I can bring to students, it has a multiplier effect than what I can do as an individual. So what I encourage my students is definitely use public transport. And if they come to my class and say, look, I don't have a parking, I'm late to the class because I would say tomorrow you should start using public transport. So it definitely creating that value. So we have kind of incorporated sustainability at our university to most of the modules. We have the bottle recycling campaign. So we involve students in our research, and also encouraging them to understand kind of the value. So students, those who are using their own transport, is now sharing the transport with other students. So ride sharing is happening with students. Use of public transport is happening. And from a university perspective, what we are also encouraging is we are giving shuttle services for students, so that to encourage them to use public transport. And also our accommodation is close to the university as well. So, so that reduces for those who opt for student accommodation, they don't have to travel long distances. And this is also used by other companies now in manufacturing, in construction, especially the construction workers are provided accommodation close to the construction site, so that it kind of reduces the distance, plus it reduces traffic congestion. And just one point before I leave, before I just conclude my top discussion, and later I will happy to take any Q&A from the audience, is some of these policies doesn't require a lot of investment or changes. It's just sometimes it's the mindset, it's the changes. In construction now, many companies have moved to receiving their supplies or transportation at night, which means the traffic is less, because that reduces the time spent on traffic, of course, the emission associated with it, but also the social the traffic that it creates, the congestion it creates. So deliveries at night, which is also encouraged now, and this requires just, you can immediately, like, it doesn't need a lot of investment. It can be like a small shift in mindset. So that's just a mix of many things I discussed now, but some things that can be easily adopted, and that's why I focused on these aspects. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Srijit, both for sharing your research as well as how the UAE has taken on a leadership role in sustainable transport and circular economy through concrete actions. And first of all, it's really wonderful to hear about how the sustainable transport in the UAE does not take on the hegemonic ableist approach, but actually ensures mobility for all, ensures its initiatives are for both people and planet. And it's just really interesting to hear about all the amazing things that have been undertaken in the UAE to really work for people and planet, to hear about the localized infrastructure that, as you said, in a country that has temperatures that reach up to 40 to 50 degrees centigrade, it's kind of difficult to adopt a one-size-fits-all solution to move towards sustainable transport. So it's really nice to hear about how those solutions have been localized. And finally, the shared value system that really brings about the mindset change that is really important. And Green Hope Foundation having an active chapter in the UAE and also working closely with your university, we definitely understand how important that is. And we've seen that in action firsthand, so we know how effective that is as well. So thank you once again for sharing all of that. And now I'd like to invite our next speaker, Alexandra Milovanov, researcher and postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kekishan. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
And I've just shared my screen because I find that sometimes it's useful to have some of the graphs or some of the pictures in front of us to talk about concepts. So first of all, thank you so much to the Green Hope Foundation for inviting me. It is a very important global conference, the Global Sustainable Transport Conference, because transport is one of those core elements to human societies that have so many implications. And so it's really important that there consensus in what to do. And exactly as pretty much all of you said, there's no one size fits all solution, but it's just discussing the agenda of potential solutions that could be combined and used in different places. So because there's so much wide range of topics, I've decided today to focus on electric vehicles and electrification. And I think the main reason is one of those topics that is trendy. It's really hot. It's a hot topic, and we've seen after COVID that many governments and institutions are saying now it's time to invest in the electric vehicle infrastructure, etc. And I would like to sort of provide a perspective on electrification, how to do it in a way that ensure a maximum sustainability. So first of all, I would like to sort of introduce the thinking that I do have when I talk about sustainability. And that's really this thinking that I try to have as a researcher. This is called systems thinking. And the idea is quite simple. The idea is that we have to acknowledge that there is a complex connection between every single component of our societies, economies, and natural environment. And so every time we do a task, a policy, a technology, we have ripple effects all over the place. And so this system thinking approach is really trying to anticipate the system behaviors and responses and trying to maximize sustainability not for a single sector or specific place, but actually to maximize it a little bit everywhere. And that's actually a very key element for circular economy, because we can see circular economy is one of those concepts where when you invest in a technology, you have many ripple effects for many other industries that have some material implications. And one practical tool that I'm going to be sort of using or discussing today is called lifecycle thinking. So the idea of lifecycle thinking is that if you look at a product or a service, you can actually look at all the stages that are required to get to this product or to be able to use it. And I think we had a great example from Jinlei earlier about biofuel waste to energy, and that part of this waste management perspective. How can you maximize the usefulness of some of your waste? And this lifecycle life cycle thinking perspective is really critical. And so we talked about energy material inputs that goes into manufacturing those different components, that goes into using it, and then ultimately at the end, how to deal with the waste. So now that we have sort of this general framework in mind, I would like to go and apply it to electrification. And I think sort of the key message that we get when we actually apply it to electrification is this one, is we cannot make transport sustainable without electrification, but electrification alone cannot make transport sustainable. And I think we had a great example from Sujit in the fact that electrification is part of the solution, but that's really not the only way to move forward. And that's the same for circular economy. And we can actually take some perspective on electrification. So now to move forward, what I would like to do is actually try to build an ecosystem of how electric vehicles can interact with our human societies. And to do so, I'm going to take the example of a private electric vehicle, and we're going to try to start with the passenger, because we need to acknowledge that ultimately for a private electric vehicle, it's really moving people. Of course, we can apply it to trucks and other types of transport, and so it can be goods or people, but the idea of the vehicle is to move people. And so what is needed in order to move this vehicle? We need to charge it. And so that's here our first component in this sustainability assessment in the ecosystem of electric vehicles. We need charging facilities. And that requires materials, because the charging facilities are not here. So that has a material footprint. And that also raises the concern of who can access those charging facilities. So in a very short term, there's some sustainable implications of making sure that is accessible and that we don't prevent people. If we force everybody to drive with EVs, we don't sort of prevent people from being able to charge. But more importantly, the energy that goes into this charging infrastructure is really the key element in trying to dictate if an electric vehicle is truly sustainable or not. Because of course, private electric vehicles requires a lot of energy to be moved. If this energy comes 100% from coal, the trade-offs are pretty bad, in the sense that it's probably better to use a conventional vehicle, especially if we start using biofuels to move those conventional vehicles. But if we move toward more renewable energy in this electricity production aspect, then definitely electric vehicles can really play a role in reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so limit our climate change impact, reduce urban air quality impacts and exposure into human health to that. And many other soil and air pollution aspects. So that's one key element of sustainability, but not really much around the material footprint. I mean, it's the charging infrastructure it is. But there is another key element that we need to look at, is the battery aspect of those electric vehicles. Because first of all, they are quite energy intensive to produce. So the entire manufacturing and supply chain of the battery requires a tremendous amount of energy. So we need to make sure that is quite sustainable. But also more importantly, the minerals and the mining associated with the critical materials that goes into the battery, the lithium, the cobalt, the manganese, the nickel, the aluminum, etc., etc. All those minerals come from across the world. And that's where circular economy is really important when we talk about electric vehicles. In the sense that if we sort of embed more and more critical materials that come from all over the world, we need to make sure that we find ways to minimize the impact over the long term. And one key solution is developing the recycling facilities and developing the knowledge and the competencies and the abilities to recycle those batteries, to make new batteries and minimize the amount of primary materials that we extract. And that requires facilities that need to be deployed as soon as possible if we want to invest in the electric vehicle perspective. Meaning that to make this ecosystem sustainable at this point, we need to think about the mining, we need to think about the transport of those critical materials, we need to think about what's going to happen when those vehicles are at the end of their lives, we need to think about the energy that goes in manufacturing those vehicles, that goes into feeding those vehicles. But another key element of this ecosystem, which is the same for conventional vehicles, is that there's so much infrastructures that is needed just to move private vehicles. Parking infrastructure, road infrastructures, and this infrastructure influence urban designs and settlement patterns, influence the way we live in many places, and directly influence how accessible the transport system is, what are our economic opportunities, etc., etc. And I think this picture is sort of a reminder that electric vehicles can become sustainable from a circular economy perspective, from many other sustainable indicator. But there's sort of a background that cannot really be changed. And the fact that they're private electric vehicles, they require so much initial infrastructure. And so electrification is actually something that should be incorporated into bigger pictures of sustainability strategies. And usually in transport, we divide them into avoid, shift, and improve, because they represent three different key strategic components we can do in order to reach sustainability and also decrease increase circular economy and decrease the material footprint. The first key element is really to look at the travel demand, the reason why we need to travel. From a sustainability perspective, there's so many people in this world that don't have enough access to transport, that that may not be appropriate for them. But there's so many people in this world that have too much access to transport and that potentially travel too much and necessary demand of travel. And that's the first key element we can do by trying to improve the design of some urban centers, limit urban sprawl, and making sure that people use active mobility, walk, bike to actually go to work and to groceries. That can be implemented in so many places, and that should be sort of the element when we develop the new cities that are growing in many places in the world. The second element is, one, we have this travel demand, making sure that people use the most efficient technology from an energy perspective, a sustainability perspective, but also from a material perspective, because private vehicles are very inefficient from all those perspectives. If we take the train, the buses, and all those means of transport, they're way more effective. So the first key elements to achieve sustainability and to achieve circular economy is to actually make sure that there's not too many cars on the road and that we have a mix of transport. And ultimately, it's about improving those technologies. Ultimately, it's about making sure that we use more biofuels when we use conventional vehicles, that we can electrify some of the other vehicles when that makes sense, that we can improve the design of those vehicles, we can potentially decrease the size, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end, what are sort of the practical recommendations? And that's sort of my key conclusion when we look at this entire picture of electrification, how that fits. I think the first key recommendation that has always been here, and that's something that we shouldn't forget, even when we talk about electrification, is the first step is to make transportation system accessible and to invest again and again and more in public transit and active mobility, because that's the only way we're going to be able to improve the circularity of our systems, to improve the sustainability of our systems. The other key element is electrification is needed, but maybe not all electrification projects are fair. And so thinking about the fairness of the electrification projects, maybe we should start developing electric buses, electric trains initially, because they benefit everybody. And a very expensive electric vehicle, even if we subsidize it, that will only benefit a subset of people. And so that's not very accessible, that's not very just from a social perspective. And finally, one of the key components that we don't talk about too much is there's too many cars on the road, but they're also getting bigger and bigger. And that has a huge material footprint, that has a huge sustainability footprint. So we also need to improve and increase the regulations to make those cars as small or optimized as possible. So thank you so much for this time. And I hope I made my points clear, and I'll be happy to take questions if needed.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing that with us. Your first point about systems thinking, that is really the basis of sustainable development as well, with its three pillars of economy, society, and the environment. I think that whole systems thinking approach also relates very well to intersectionality and how that is important to address all of the issues. And, I think that also relates to how you spoke about the whole private electric vehicle ecosystem example. Is really like a web where it showed us how there are so many different layers that need to be addressed before we truly have sustainable transport, and how circular economy plays a role in that, where sustainable transport helps create circular economy, but circular economy also helps to enhance sustainable and clean transport for all. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today. And now I shall invite our next panelist, Anshita Hegde, Chapter Head of Green Hope Foundation, India. Anshita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Heksha. Greetings, I'm Anshita Hegde, the Chapter Head of Green Hope Foundation, India. I am delighted to be part of this panel discussion where I get to hear so many new ideas and present my views on the necessity of sustainable transport systems. Switching to sustainable transport should have been a decision made several years ago. However, it is better late than never. With countries all coming on the same page of sustainable development and technology reaching its peak, now it's an opportune period for a smooth and effective transition to more viable and sustainable transport options. Our necessity for an alternative mode of transport and the need to protect our Earth has urged us to look for unusual yet simple sources of energy, perfect our machines to be greener, and inculcate sustainable habits in our daily lives. The concept of sustainable transport is simple, yet it surprises many of us on how effective it can be. The benefits of sustainable transport range from less pollution to safer modes of transportation. It also conserves our land, is cost effective, and helps us to maintain our health. Most importantly, it creates jobs and helps in the development of a circular economy. The traditional transport economy has long been a linear system of take, make, dispose. Sustainable transport systems support production cycles that minimize waste using metrics to reduce materials and increase recycling, reuse, and repair once objects are produced, thus creating an effective circular economy. While applying the principles of the circular economy may seem like a cost-inducing practice at first, it has the potential to be profitable once a successful transition is done. By successful transition, I intend to imply that despite many countries switching to greener modes of transport, the circular economy model has not been integrated throughout the whole production and life cycle of transportation. It is an issue which must be addressed for cost-effective and easy availability of sustainable transport systems. Like I mentioned earlier, switching to sustainable transport should have been a decision taken years ago. However, I realize that this switch is more than words. Several challenges exist which must be addressed. We need apt infrastructural settings like increased road capacities and well-developed traffic system, policy frameworks that support the production of greener modes and public acceptance. As long as we, the citizens, are reluctant and refuse to bring changes in our daily lives, no amount of support from government and willingness of corporates can make the transition an effective process, making sure that our current model is sustainable and helps ensure a just transition towards sustainable transport. Now, a valid question would be, how can young people make a difference? Many would suggest that you need investment, models, and laws to get significant change. But through my experience in Greenhope Foundation, youth are much more capable, and the role we as individuals play proves critical in this process. Choosing the right kind of transport, carpooling techniques, shifting trends to solar-powered and sustainable vehicles all depend on individual behavior. The more we shift our perspective to sustainable modes, the greater will be the incentive for corporates and governments to take these steps. Our ongoing projects at Greenhope Foundation across different regions involving a wide spectrum of communities prove that adopting sustainable transport is entirely possible. Our most potent tool for action is education that creates awareness about the possibilities while also changing behaviors and mindsets. We dispel the false notion that only adults or institutions can take action. Each one of us can make the right choices. However, to do so, we must possess the knowledge. Through our academies and workshops, both in person and in virtual, we reach out to all sections of civil society, creating awareness about the existing issues about anthropogenic climate change, the impacts of fossil fuels, and what steps each individual can take. They learn to calculate their carbon footprint, and this provides them with the knowledge of how making informed choices, for example, cycling to school or ride sharing or taking public transport, helps to bring down their footprint. If each of the 7 billion plus people had this awareness and could make informed choices that led to reducing their carbon footprint by even 1%, we would have solved the climate crisis by now. But instead of doing this, we continue to spend billions on discussing policies while little is done to engage civil society to participate in the implementation. The work that non-state actors like Greenhope Foundation are doing need to be supported and scaled so that we can bring about a behavioral change. Our work across 25 countries requires travel. Even there, we ensure that we use carriers that transparently declare their processes to reduce the impact of their emissions. For example, KLM has a fully defined process of how they reduce engine usage during taxiing. They indicate the CO2 emissions for each flight, offering passengers the choice to purchase an offset. At Greenhow Foundation, we provide the same facility. Not only do we completely offset the carbon footprint of all our members through tree plantings and solar grid installations, we also encourage our partners to offset their carbon emissions through our programs. One of our recent projects innovatively addresses this intersectionality of clean energy, education, and sustainable transport to reduce inequalities. Millions of children, especially in the third world, have dropped out of school since the advent of the pandemic. The situation is critical and we'll risk losing an entire generation, exposing them to abuse, exploitation, and radicalization. The Greenhow Foundation has launched a unique mobile library project which runs on solar energy. Implemented at first in a village of rural Bangladesh, this project will take the library to the doorstep of hundreds of children in villages. The local Greenhow not only distribute books to children, they also read them out and conduct storytelling sessions for young learners or for those who cannot read, so that knowledge continues to get imparted, overcoming local challenges. Encouraged by the impact, we have launched this project in rural India too. There are hundreds of villages in the global south where children like these have missed out on going to school for more than 1.5 years. Our target is to reach thousands of children in Bangladesh and India in the next 12 months, and then upscale and replicate this project in other rural communities across the world to provide library access to thousands more by the end of 2022. In the villages where this mobile library operates, it has become the center of attention, and the residents, regardless of their age, flock to it as it moves around community. Other van operators that use gasoline have now approached us to convert them to solar. This clearly indicates that people in general are willing to change and adopt sustainable transport solutions. But the biggest hurdles, especially in the global south, are financing and lack of supporting infrastructure. It is these gaps that global conferences and multilateral platforms must utilize to urge the rich nations to collaborate and develop regions beyond their national boundaries. Successive IPCC reports have been sounding the alarm about the dangers of slow individual action. The lockdown during the early days of COVID-19 gave us a glimpse of what is possible if we travel sustainably. Let us rebuild forward to ensure that we avoid past mistakes and create a sustainable and equitable world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anshita, for sharing Green Hope Foundation's work, for highlighting the importance of individual action and of how critical education is in this transition to sustainable transport and circular economy that really allows the individual to offset their carbon footprint and make informed choices on moving towards sustainable transport, and in turn helping to create a circular economy. And as you also said, financing and lack of infrastructure is a huge problem. And it's really easy to say that we must move to sustainable transport when there's already infrastructure present. But in several countries around the world, the infrastructure is not there, and it's important that we address it from that lens and localize the solutions so that we're able to really meet the needs of both people in planet. So thank you once again. And with that, I shall invite our next speaker, Erin Isabel, Outreach Officer of Green Hope Foundation, based out of the USA and UAE. Erin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, I'm glad to be here to discuss the pertinent topic of sustainable transportation. It's vital to have conversations such as these to understand exactly how we can progress in this field. We must take ownership and realize that each of us has an important role to play in supporting the achievement of Agenda 2030. And it's imperative to consider a variety of perspectives reflecting the needs of the most vulnerable and individuals in developing countries and small island developing states. The transportation sector is an intricate one, and I'm excited to share my views on it. Sustainable transportation encompasses services and infrastructure for the mobility of people and goods. Our main targets as of the present include working on universal access, enhanced safety, reduced environmental and climate impacts, improved resilience, and greater efficiency of sustainable transportation. However, sustainable transportation is not a standalone goal in the SDGs. Rather, it's directly connected towards attaining all the SDGs, as the SDGs link transportation in its targets and indicators. For example, SDG 3 focuses on health, which addresses road traffic accidents. Ensuring that transportation is safe contributes significantly to the achievement of that goal. Therefore, sustainable transportation is recognized as an enabler and necessary for achieving many of the SDGs. The current problems that exist in the transportation sector impact aspects including the environment, society, and health. Unfortunately, close to a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions come from transport, and these emissions are projected to grow substantially in the years to come, further exacerbating climate change. Other pollutants, most evidently in many urban centers, directly impact health. Casualties and deaths from accidents are also on the rise. So we are in dire need of proactive measures, and thus sustainable transport seeks to fully realize these benefits. Moreover, with COVID-19, recovering will also be a chance for all actors to rethink passenger transport and come up with solutions that can not only withstand possible future crises, but also support the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. This is essential given current trends with population growth, urbanization, and digitalization. While technological advances can provide new opportunities for realizing sustainable transport, they may also come with unknown risks and challenges that need to be addressed. The UAE, for the past few years now, has taken advantage of an alternative source of energy that the Arabian Peninsula has to offer, and is now a world leader in alternative energy and sustainable transport. To add to what Srijit mentioned, the Road and Transport Authority is making continued efforts to plan for sustainable and environmentally friendly public transport. These plans focus on curbing climate change and support the long-term national initiative rolled out by the Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE. It also supports the commitment of the UAE to the Paris Agreement on climate change to reduce the emissions in the UAE by 23.5% by 2030. The plan includes broadening the use of electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles and buses in the fleet of public transport, school buses, taxis, and limousines to reach the targeted 100% rate by 2050. And as Alexander mentioned, this aligns with the idea of broadening the concept of electrification, which is proven to be much more effective. Srijit also mentioned how individuals are more inclined to use public transport in the UAE, considering that it just is so accessible, which is absolutely true. It's been recorded that instead of private vehicles, using public transportation in the UAE saved 642,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions in 2018. And these various strategies promote the use of renewable energy and a significant increase in the use of clean energy, thus lowering Dubai's carbon footprint. Installing solar cells in buildings and facilities, as well as using LED lights in streets, traffic signals, and tram and metro stations, have also significantly contributed to these remarkable strides. I did mention that UAE's public transportation is maintained remarkably well. However, the unfortunate fact is that mobility is not as safe, accessible, and affordable for the public in other countries. And more broadly, every country is not as safe for women as the UAE. In fact, when looking at sustainable transportation from a lens of gender equality, it can be noted that inadequate and unsafe transport infrastructure has a more significant negative impact on women's economic opportunities when compared to those of men. However, despite this data, mobility plans do not consider the needs of women and girls, and thus neglect their views for safety and security. When women feel unsafe in public spaces, they're less likely to travel, and this hinders their access to education and social services, making them unable to take advantage of the current economic and social opportunities. So transportation planners can no longer turn a blind eye to girls and women, now more than ever, considering that challenges are so well documented. One report addressed the question of what would cities look like if they were designed by women for women? And some of the ideas that I read included In order for a street to be a safe place, you must be able to see the street from everywhere. So people should be engaged in activities along the street, and people should be able to see the street from nearby buildings. The reason being that dark corners and mocked spaces invoke fear because they're perfect places for potential attackers to hide. So again, a few more guidelines can be enforced, including ensuring that vegetation is no higher than 1 meter and trees are adequately maintained to avoid blocking lighting. Ensuring that the entrances to new housing related buildings are on street level and avoid creating hiding spaces also facilitates this goal. In specific, Janet Sanz, Barcelona's deputy mayor for urbanism, is leading one of the city's most ambitious plans to allow pedestrians to reclaim the city through super blocks, which is formed by conjoining 9 city blocks and closing it to most traffic. So this is done by ensuring that all parked cars go underground, allowing parks, landscaping, seating, and play areas filled with people to replace busy junctions. So in summary, we can adapt mobility plans to consider the needs of women and girls through gender-informed transport policies, strategies, and regulations, routine analysis of gender and transport issues during transport planning and implementation, and gender-inclusive consultation. All these mechanisms combat the issues that prevent us from progressing in sustainable transportation. And I look forward to the outcome of the second United Nations Global Sustainable Transport Conference. I'm confident that with the input from visionary leaders worldwide, as well as non-state actors, we will make meaningful progress in sustainable transportation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin, for sharing that with us. And first of all, for highlighting how, as you said, that sustainable transport is like an enabler for the implementation of the SDGs and Agenda 2030, and how it, while it doesn't have its own goal, it just fits into the other SDGs and the targets and indicators. And thank you for adding to the amazing work the UA is doing, and also for addressing the extremely important gender aspect of sustainable transport and mobility, because as we all know, that is something that is not very often addressed because of the lack of gender disaggregated data. And it's really important that we understand that different people have different needs and unique needs. And for women and girls, if we really want to move towards sustainable transport and a circular economy, that kind of safety mechanism is very much needed. So thank you once again. And with that, I'd just like to thank all of our panelists today for sharing your views with us. We had such a diverse range of viewpoints and perspectives from different sectors, but at the end of the day, it was all about how sustainable transport, how important it is to move to sustainable transport, and how that can facilitate a transition to the circular economy. And with that, we would love to take some questions from our audience on both Zoom and Facebook Live. So I'm looking at Facebook Live first right now. And this question is for all the panelists, and it is, how can we empower non-state actors and civil society in general so that they can upscale their impact in both LDCs as well as more developed nations to rebuild better? So the floor is open.
I can.
Go ahead.
Thanks for the question. I'm sure that already is answered in our panel discussion, as all our esteemed panelists have already discussed. For me personally, from being an academic, I would say definitely the involvement with students. As Anshita mentioned, it's the young young generation is critical in playing to be in the forefront of sustainable leadership. So definitely starting even at a school level, moving towards to the university and even the foundation programs, to have sustainability being part of the curriculum. And that's very, very important. I'll give a few examples of some of the initiatives at the school level. It's not letting them waste food, bring home from cooked food, and telling them to avoid junk food or wastage of food at a school level, create that kind of, be part of their how they are and their living. So that's very important to know that. And also at schools are promoting school buses instead of not letting parents drop them. They're not saying no, but they're not encouraging that. So they're saying school bus should be the first priority for students. And sometimes that's very important, given that parents picking their students and create congestion and in prime time, like 3 p.m., like it becomes like impossible to go anywhere because of this traffic. So again, it takes at an individual level, at a parent level, at a children level. So we kind of share that impact. And as clearly Anshita mentioned, and also Erin mentioned, if individuals can do what their contribution, even at a very minuscule level, that has a huge impact on, it has a ripple effect, and that would definitely help that. Just adding one more point is, some of the technologies like the way we are having this Zoom meeting now, we kind of offset, right? If we were all to meet in China or wherever it is, it would have an impact on footprint. So we could still have the same level of impact. So avoid transport for companies. They usually have these physical face-to meetings. It's important, sometimes unavoidable. I'm sure for Green Hope as well, you need travel, but many of these things can now be done virtually, just like we are having this discussion. So having those mindset of simple changes, which are like accessible for all, like technology, internet is accessible. So how can this be imparted? And whatever we do, we as the panelists mentioned, is linked to transportation. I can give an example on 3D printing. So 3D printing, again, UAE is in the forefront of 3D printing as well. In construction sites, 3D printing. So this kind of offsets the amount of delivery vehicles that is required, because whether transporting employees or transporting materials. So 3D printing definitely will reduce the number of transportation required. So linking and making that, again, coming back to Alex's mind, that understanding that complex relationships and solving it, and finally you would all get these connected, and you'll see that these although they are look at isolated innovations, but at some point they will all connect, and that's very important to link and develop from there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Srijit. Would anyone else like to answer that question? Yes, and then Jinlei.
Okay, so I agree with Srijit's perspective. Sorry, education for sustainable development is crucial, and we see it firsthand. Also, it is important that civil society and non-state actors do not underestimate their potential to create an impact. We need to understand that every small action counts. Partnerships are also very important, where it is safe to do so, working with private sector and government to create a more holistic approach. Non-state actors have a lot of power. We just must not forget that. So just start small and go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anshita. Jinlei.
Yes, I would like to add very briefly from the policy perspective, because one of the main barriers to promote sustainable transport globally is low public awareness. So it's very important and necessary for policymakers to have the measures to raise public awareness and improve the information sharing on sustainable transport options and their benefits. So two main policy measures for the policymakers is the first is to involve all the stakeholders, include residents and the civil society, into the processing by public consultation. So when all the urban planning and the transport strategy, the public consultation is a necessary step to involve these stakeholders. And another is the public campaign to raise all the general public awareness on the benefits of sustainable transport options and availability where in their community or neighborhoods. So these two are my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jinlei. I will take another question. I see. I'll come back to Zoom. There's a raised hand from Duty. So Duty will be joining us as a panelist to ask it live. And I see we have another one in the Q&A box, which we'll get to after Duty. Hello, Duty. Are you able to hear us and see us? You have the floor.
Yes. Thank you, Kekashan, and thank you, panelists, for such an amazing discussion. My name is Dyuti Vasupal, and my question is for all the panelists. Millions of people are engaged in the fossil fuel industry. If the transport sector moves to renewable sources, how do we ensure the continued prosperity of these people?
Thank you, Duty. Floor is open. Alexander, you've unmuted.
Yes, thank you, Judy. It's a very important question. I think everything has to do with time, because there's no way we'll be able to change and transform all our society in overnight. And I think it's actually connected to the discussion we had before. Of course, governments need to make sure that they support the education of people that are working in certain industries to move to other industries. But also, I think there is some economic power that the industries, and we can see them right now, who are, I don't want to use the word dying, but that are scaling down, are naturally evolving and changing toward other industries, and we can see that in some countries that are highly that have historically been largely based on fossil fuel sources. Now they have so much investments, and I think Srijit provided so many perspective and beautiful thing that is happening in a country that has been built historically and economically from so many fossil fuel sources. Anyway, he will be able to say that better than me. My point is, it will take time. And this time is about transitioning. This time is about making sure that we take those people and we support them. So developing education programs, and then so many new economic opportunities that will arise with the advance of renewable energy sources, with the advance of people talked about autonomous vehicles, or with the advance of so many new things that can be part of the sustainability equation. So it's a matter of, I think, being. My last point is, we have to be confident that we can do it, and we have to embrace the change, because if we are scared and if we're not okay with changing my job, etc., it will never work. So that's why it's it's an education process and awareness that we all have to embrace this change and take the time to do it.
Thank you very much. Yes, Srijit.
Yes, I just add a few points to Alex said. It's a complex question, and that question has been there for years. And whenever there is new technology came, this question was always there. I can still remember growing up in southern part of India when when computers were introduced, people were protesting. That was when I was young, and when it's like, what will happen to their job? Computers is going to take away all their jobs. And even before that, if you look at the print industry, when digital printers came, the artists who used to draw advertisements in boardings, right? Like they protested. So it's been there, and it's important that we transition them. So technology, you cannot stop technology and the changes. But it can be aligned with the sustainable development goals, because one of the sustainable development goals is decent work. So if you ask me, in construction sector in UAE now, we are moving more towards automation, use of 3D printing. UAE has the first 3D printed infrastructure in the world. So you moving towards use of technology in construction sites, in a way it's aligned with the sustainable development goals of providing decent work. Because imagine workers working at 40-45 degrees Celsius in summer heat, and they can be moved to other jobs. So it's about, and many contracting companies have started upskilling and reskilling their employees. And that gives them an opportunity, even at their 40s and 50s, able to do something which they never did before. It's also exciting for them. And transitioning them to some jobs, maybe in warehouses, procurement, maybe inventory control. So there are ways we can actually move them. Yes, it would lead to unemployment. That's true. Maybe that's short term, but we should not miss the big picture. That's very important. And that kind of hopefully answers your question. So it's collective effort of what we do with the short-term impact of unemployment. But definitely, as you all say, like technology is likely to create more jobs than it will take away, or definitely it's then there are statistics supporting that, showing technology will definitely be an enabler and will create more jobs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Srijit. Aaron, you've raised your hand.
Yep. Thank you, Duthi, for that very valid question. I think closing down fossil fuel companies suddenly, like many climate activists call for, is not going to work. We need the just transition, and we need to make sure jobs are there and available and that their jobs are secure. So time is essential towards this, and this works along the lines of an age-old question, which is what's going to happen if everything's automated? And we know that this claim has been addressed. And because when we embrace new technologies, it just paves the way to so much more. And through the right bridging programs, I'm confident that we will be able to see the benefit in the eventual long term. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And thank you, Duty, for that question. Okay, so we have a question in the Q&A box, and we have a question, a raised hand as well. So from the Q&A box first. So this is from Aliu from Liberia. Thanks to all the panelists for such insightful suggestions and process leading towards having a world with sustainable transportation. My question is to the first three speakers. How do countries with absolutely no existing infrastructure move into upcycling their MSW to provide renewable and sustainable energy for their transport system? Thank you, Aliu, for the question. And Jinlai, Srijit, Alex. Yes, Jinlai?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Thank you very much. And first, I would like to say the municipal solid waste from waste to energy is not optional, actually. It's a necessary step to decarbonize the whole economy globally, because the first is that if you see, no matter which context, urban waste has been growing to be a big problem for cities, for urbanization, especially in the developing world where more urban populations are increasing, and the more municipal urban waste is generated, and we can see very clear it's a big problem. So waste to energy is the best option to address both the urban waste issue and accelerate the transition to renewables by replacing fossil fuel in transport sector. So that's my first point. And the second point is that actually, without necessary infrastructure to accelerate the waste to energy steps, it's very important, as I mentioned, for policymakers to integrate the policy making for both energy and city management of different sectors, because the first is market demand from the transport sector, which need the transport and the city management, the departments to be involved, but also a very, very key issue could be the collecting system of the municipal solid waste to provide sustainable and qualified feedstock for the digester plants. So it's very important to integrate the policymaking into those departments involved into this policymaking. The last point is that it's very, very important to set the targets at the beginning, because as you mentioned, without any existing infrastructure, one of the key barriers, and also I can foresee, is the high investment in the near future if you want to move to the waste to energy strategy. So the first option, the first priority to ensure and attract investment into this infrastructure is the long-term targets. Long-term targets can enable the investments, especially the infrastructures which need decades to be built, to be improved locally, to build qualified and sustainable segments for the whole economy. So targets, long-term targets is very necessary to enable the investment. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jinlei. Srijit, you are unmuted. Would you like to answer?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the question. It's a very tough question to answer, because especially in developing or underdeveloped countries, how we can talk with, again, talking from some of my research, it's very important that we look at, use words or language which can relate to them. Something can be as simple, can have a huge impact. So maybe a bit out of context, I can give you a few examples of using mobile pay in African countries for making employment salary, which had a huge impact, because before there were like issues of abuse of not paying on time. So using the normal 2G mobile network to make a mobile-based pay can created a huge change in terms of how employees, especially when you talk about gender equality, like women workers, they were paid. At least there were some monitoring on how were they paid, and they can also pay their suppliers. Most of them are daily traders, so they could use the mobile pay to pay the suppliers. So issues of theft, so they don't have to carry cash with them, which are vulnerable, especially for women in those parts of the world. So they could use just their mobile pay to pay their suppliers, even take short-term loans. So use a simple mobile phone, which is not a smartphone. Also, it's incredible what we can do with that kind of a mindset. So same way, infrastructure-wise, for developing countries, I have done research, so consulted with governments in Southeast Asia, especially countries in Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia. So there also, they want to promote sustainability, but it also has to start at the grassroots level. I'll give you one example of a cross-border traders in the Thailand and Cambodia area. They were really impacted by COVID, and all the borders were shut, and they would just go those living in the border would go just walk. Basically, they can walk to the Thailand border, cross the Thailand border. They have daily pass, and that's how they used to trade a living. Suddenly, the COVID, and they've been just blocked. And what came to the rescue is it's the trucks were allowed to go, but so these individual traders, mostly informal women traders, what they did is they consolidated their and they worked together rather than compete with each other. They worked together, and then they sent the shipments to the other side, in Thailand and other nearby countries. So there were like support, of course, from companies, transport companies, but they all came together to help these address this problem. So again, it's all on shared values on how we can create, especially for developing and underdeveloped. Last point is it's also again coming from my research on understanding of firms, the role of firms. So they do have a role to play in these countries. We were working with country managers of DHL in creating the mindset program at our university. So, and then most of them were from African, and we they said like what we can do for sustainability, because the big terminologies they don't understand. So it's very important how we can, the large companies engage, and they can slowly start helping Infrastructure wise, again, I do research, and gender divide is very close to my heart. And in our center, we have promoting women for supply chain. So one of the issues in with again coming back to the cross-border trade is women would get more economic opportunities if they can travel more towards the border, not just in the border. They can go far in the border, but the problem is they have to return on the same day. So providing them with safe transport is very important, and many of them lose that opportunity to sell their goods just because they have to get back home before night and because it's not safe anymore. So if they had the opportunity of a safe transport, they could get more economic opportunities in terms of traveling, and then they don't have to have a support. They have a male companion. Usually they pay them so that they provide them security to do the trading. So again, it takes on the profit as well. So safe transport can actually create a lot of economic opportunities for women, and that can start with simple things, especially in these countries, if that answers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Srijit. And I am cognizant of time. So before we come to you, Alexander, I'll take one more question and maybe can answer that together. I think it is very relevant. Otobi, the floor is yours. You can unmute.
Thank you, panelists. Hello, everyone. I am Otobi from a village in Bangladesh. My question is, sustainable transport is always more expensive. How can we make it more affordable? Thank you.
Thank you, Otobi, for that valid question. Alexander, would you like to take that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a very important part of the question, and my very short answer is investing in developing what we know works, and what we know works is public transit and active mobility, and making sure that those infrastructure are safe. I think we had great examples during this panel where we talked about, for example, how to make sure that women are safe when they are part of their in cities, and that's making sure that the lighting is working properly, that the pavements are pedestrian friendly and not oriented toward the cars themselves. So overall, I think the question is really investing in these types of infrastructures, and that is cheaper than actually investing in very complex technologies, and that should be done first before moving to more expensive stuff when people have access to that and it's not that cheap. So yeah, that's my short answer.
Great, thank you very much. We have about 3 minutes left. So would any of our other panelists like to quickly answer that? Yes, Jinla, you've unmuted.
Yes, very quick. The first is that it's necessary for the government to provide fiscal and finance support, such as reduce the tax and subsidies, as a lot of countries have done. Second is it's continue the research development is very necessary. If you see last 10 years, the electric vehicle, the cost reduction of batteries is very important for this research and development. Third, always one key point, expensive compared to what? So if you see expensive compared to conventional fossil fuel vehicles, one of the reasons is all the fossil fuel is subsidized because they're polluting and all the externalities not levied by the government. So remove fossil fuel subsidies and all the carbon cost is necessary. These policies are very important to correct the market distortion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jinlei. Very quickly, Erin, I saw you on mute as well.
Thank you. I completely agree. I think when transport is more affordable, people would want it more, and I think it just eventually leads to like price reductions, which I mean in the long term makes it affordable for everybody. So time, I think, is essential. So even if it is expensive at start or relatively expensive, the price will eventually go down when more people start using it. And we know just how well that worked for Dubai, because the transportation is just so affordable for everybody. So I think, yeah, just time and research.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Autobi, for the question. Thank you so much to all of our panelists today for sharing your views and perspectives with us. This has been truly enlightening. We have just heard so many different viewpoints. You've talked about mobility, accessibility, sustainable transport, infrastructure, finance, shared value systems, and partnerships with government, private sector, civil society, the importance of both individual and collective action. So we do have the tools in place and the framework of action. It's just time for us now to really adhere to that, move forward, take concrete actions, and ensure that countries around the world, communities around the world have that infrastructure in place to move towards sustainable transport and then move towards a circular economy, and then also vice versa. So once again, thank you so much to our panelists and to our audience for joining us at our side event at the second United Nations Global Sustainable Transport Conference. Till we meet again, please stay safe, stay connected, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.